From time to time, someone will be watching one of my quick tips, and that quick tip will stimulate another question. That happened with this one. The person was watching quick tip 320, where I was comparing chiaroscuro with no tan. And this person asked as a result, could you please explain what compressed values means? That one is going to require 2 quick tips. So we'll use the first one for the first part. Well, the language or the visual language has received great expansion just over the past 5 or 10 years. I think it's probably because so many people are making instructional videos, and two, with all the workshops that are going on and have been going on for years, artists who teach sometimes will come up with their own words for things. And then those words will be clearer than former words that were used or terms that were used. And those words will start catching on. So the visual vocabulary is expanding. This particular word, compressed values, our term, compressed value, is one that's got some history. One has to do with a more traditional way that we can use value or study values, really. And the other has to do with what was happening during the time of the Impressionists. So that's why you're going to get 2 parts here. So with this part, in this quick tip, we're going to address the more traditional way that compressed values is used. Now also you'll see the backward value compression. So let's look at it like this. Here's the value scale. Now the value scale is simply a diagram that represents readable values, because there are thousands of values if you start breaking them down into little tiny bit of increments. We can't do that. We can't see that. The human eye can discern the difference between this value and this value, for example, and probably the value in between. But over the years, the 10 unit value scale has been settled upon pretty much as the standard. When I was a student back in the 60s, of the 1960s, we used a 7 unit value scale. So, but with industry, that's expanded. All right. So we've got, with the 10 unit value scale, representing all the readable values. Now I have a photograph here for you that I chose to try to show you how that is represented in real life. So if you'll notice, the darkest dark value on this image is right up in this area here, and of course the cast shadow here, and this little occlusion shadow right down here. If you don't know that term, occlusion shadow, that's that darkest shadow where light gets totally squeezed out when 2 surfaces are touching each other. That's my simplistic explanation of occlusion. Okay, that would be this one right here. And then if you'll notice, we see inside here several degrees of value just in that shadow area there. We see a little bit here. We see let's see 2 degrees of value change in this shadow area, and we see quite a few degrees of value coming from where it gets really close in that occlusion right there. And then as it comes up the side of the pot, and then we see those values kind of varying just a little bit between themselves as it goes up before they hit the light. So we see a wide range, but we might say that all the values that we see here could be broken down into, let's say all the values that we see in the shadows here, the shadow areas, could be broken down into this range right here, possibly reaching a little bit over right here. And then all the ones that we see in the light would be broken down in this range over here. Well, when we're drawing or painting, we can see those better if we average them out or compress them in the beginning. I'm going to show you what I mean by that. The usual way of doing this is to say a value range, select a light, middle, and dark value range, and compress all the values that we see, say all the values that we see from the darkest dark on through the, you might what we call moderate shadow. That would be one value. And then the ones that we see in between would be another value, and then we compress the ones we see in the light, the very strong light areas, into another value, 3 values. So we've compressed 10 values into 3. So I'm going to do just a really rough demonstration for you to show you how we can make that work. Now, what we do know in painting, in the process of painting, if you're using oil paint, or if you're using acrylic, or if you're using pastels, also gouache, if you will use this process from dark to light, breaking up those values and compressing them first, and then within those work out your various degrees of value, it comes together much more cleanly and communicates more clearly, and it's just a good way to approach painting. Watercolor is just the other way around, but I'm going to approach it just from the point of view of those materials, and also in drawing those materials though that we can use this with. So very quickly here, I'm just going to do a rough little sketch, or what we'd call preliminary drawing, that sort of represents what we're seeing here. So we'll just throw this on very quickly. I'm not going to include the hands. They're not part of what I'm trying to show you. So I'm just going to assume that those hands aren't there, and I'll just represent that inside quickly, like here, and then we'll see the outside rim quickly, coming up like that. So just to get that placed so that you get an idea of where we are, and then that kind of comes straight down like that on either side, and then there's a turn on this side and a turn on that side, and that I sometimes, when I'm doing these shapes that are absolutely mirror images, where one side is a mirror image of the other, which we call symmetrical shapes, sometimes I'll just carry a line down to indicate where the center is, so I can then gauge each side with that. We have a subtle movement there that is, well, that's not quite as curved as I've made it, but it doesn't matter, because it's just a guide for me to follow to show you what I'm talking about. So we'll just do it like that, maybe. So the idea there is not necessary to get a totally accurate drawing, but to just place that so we can see. And I just indicate there that little rim there, and then right here. Now, what I like to do is to impress it further before I begin the real placement of the values into just light and shadow. Now, I call that my no-tan, and if you want to know more about that, you can go to Amazon and get my book called The Art of No-Tan, where I explain how the whole thing works. But aside from that, I had to get that little plug in. Aside from that, I'll just get this other brush here, do this quicker. What I will do there is to indicate, I just take a very light wash and indicate the entire shadow area in a wash. So let's get that just a little bit thinner there, because I don't want that quite so dark. Doesn't matter that much though. But what I'll do there is I will just indicate. Now if I see kind of this, the light source is coming like this, so this is sort of at an angle where that shadow is. So I will just say, all right, the shadow area sort of ends there, and then a little bit like that. I'm throwing that into a single value, just to be a pattern, a diagram that will represent for me just where I see shadow. I see a shadow coming across here, and then that brush with that stroke went up a little bit too far. All this is in shadow down here, so I'll make all of that just one value. And then let's see, over on this side, what we have, starting right up here at the edge of the rim, we have shadow as well. And then that shadow also has an angle. Okay, look at that angle, the way the light's hitting that. that shadow angles in this direction. It really goes over about like that. And then we have this coming right across like that. And then shadow right over in here. And then all this little part right in here. Yeah, there's a little bit of light shining right in there. But all this right in here falls into shadow. So I'll just say, okay, all this is shadow. Then, easier way to do that then is to go back in there and pull out the light. And so, because sometimes when we're doing, especially when we're using a brush to indicate a no tan, or where just the light and shadow are, sometimes that the brush stroke will stray, as that one did. And so I'm just going to pull out where I see light. Now, of course, that's just the indication of the edge there. And so we see some light right over there. And I see, okay, the cast shadow. I'm going to ignore that cast shadow because we're not going to include those hands, so we'll just ignore that one. And I see now that's the angle of that shadow. Probably needs to do more like this. Then that piece of light is down like that. So that does, oops, that comes over more like this. And then more like this. And that probably, let's see if I squint at it. I think maybe that shadow might go over just a little bit more tilt. All right, so that would represent just pretty much like that. Of course, then we always consider the background. I'm not going to include background in this because it's the technique I want to show you, not the complete painting. And there will be those of you that will argue with me that I can see, they can see the technique better if I put the background in. You can see just fine like this. Don't worry about that. All right. Now, what I have done here in creating a no tan is I have compressed values. I've compressed all the values in the shadow side into one value, just one dark. And I've compressed all the values on the light side into one value, which is light. Now, not all painters will do this. This is my approach, and a lot of painters do begin with a no tan like I do, but not all of them. But the ones who do use this approach of compressing values as they're in the process of creating a painting, a lot of portrait painters will do this, by the way, but landscape painters will do this too sometimes. So what we'll do there is to have a portion of this shadow to be represented in the darkest dark. Just a portion. And a portion of this shadow, or the light, represented with a lightest light. Then an in-between or middle value that represents that transition area of value. So what we're doing there is we're compressing the values to the darks will be compressed in this range. The middle values will be compressed in this range, and the lights will be compressed in this range. And I'll show you how that goes because that's all I need to show you. All right, so I'll start out with the darks. Let's get some paper towel here and just very quickly show you how that works. So to start out with, what we'll do there is to load the brush and begin to place just darks. And I'm just using just one color here. I'm not trying to, I don't want to get into the whole color business with this. But I'm just using one color to show you. So I'm just using here, this is the Rembrandt Transparent Oxide Red. So I'm just using this one dark here to show you this. Now what I'm going to do is, this is starting of the dark area. So what I'm going to do here is to just bring that over just about halfway, or maybe 2/3 way, 3/4, it doesn't matter very much, into that shadow area, where the shadow is right here. Just the shadow area. And then I'll come up and do the same thing in all those. This is form shadow, by the way. That's something you should know if you're a painter. Something you should know is that the shadow that is on an image is its form shadow. It's on the form. The shadow that is cast by something like this one is a cast shadow where the light is being blocked. Now, I have heard some people call this form shadow a core shadow. Actually, it's not a core shadow. The core shadow is a portion of the form shadow, but I may have explained that somewhere along the line. I know I've explained it in my my courses. I've got a little bit of a shaky hand there, but it doesn't matter. So I might have explained that somewhere, the core shadow, the way light, yes I have, the way light behaves when it falls on a rounded surface is that right where the surface is reaching away from the shadow and into light, it would be just a little bit darker on some surfaces, and that's the core shadow. So the form shadow is the entire shadow, and then that form shadow has parts, but that's not a part of that's a little side piece there. So I'm just going to get that just sort of placed enough so that we can see. I'm going to go the same thing on the inside here. Now I've got to pretend I don't see those hands. So that's very, very dark shadow, the way the light's coming from this direction. I can tell that by the cast shadow, but I also can tell it by where these light rays are hitting and where they're missing. And so that one I'll bring over to about right here. Probably about right there is sufficient. Now I want to keep this would be the first step of block in. For those of you who are my students who know that I always like to do the block in first. With this, but if you're using compressed values as a part of the steps of your block in of your painting, then this would be the block in. All right, now the next step, this is where I would see that where I have determined that I'm compressing, you might say, all these values into one. Right now I am. So now I'm going to compress these values, all these values right in here. I'm going to compress those into a middle value. So I've already mixed my middle value of this color. I think I started to say that color and then probably trailed off and didn't get it. Rembrandt's transparent oxide red, or transparent red oxide. All right, now what we do here is keep these flat, and I really can't emphasize that enough. When you're placing the compression, the value compression, keeping the colors, the values flat is helpful in the beginning. So I'm carrying this over now, this compression that represents about 3 or 4 of those values. I'm going to carry it right into the light now. So I carried it over into the shadow. I'm going to pull it more into where I have indicated the light to be. And then, all right, so on the other side, it's probably going to do something like this too, as it's just the light is going around that side. So it's probably going to do something about like that, and probably coming about right like that. So we compress that. Now let's just compress these. They'll compress these now into this middle value. And so see, I'm keeping it very flat, not giving it any value gradation at this point. Keeping it very flat. And then, all right, and then I'm going to go up into this portion right here. Go into the shadow area. First of all, go into the shadow area just a bit. And there's no mathematical formula here. Let your eyes be your guide. It's always better to let your eyes be your guide anyway. Don't follow formulas. They can just inhibit you and make you nervous and prevent you from enjoying what you're doing because you're trying to follow a dadgum formula. I don't see any useful formulas at all in the process of painting. I see lots of use for observing and responding to what you observe. Okay, so, well, this is not as flat, but it's okay to show you. And then in the light part, I'm going to compress those values, and I'm going to compress them into the darker light part. Now, there is another term, halftones, and I've seen it used in many. I've seen different kinds of definitions given for halftone. The definition for halftone that's most traditional is those values between the center light and the shadow area, or the transition that goes into the shadow area. There's these set of values about right here, right in here, are the halftones. Now, center light is very rarely seen. No, I'm not going to say it that way. you see the center light when you see reflective surfaces. If this were a glass surface, there would be a really, really strong light that would be really white. You've seen that before on shiny cars, where the light's shining on it in that one area where it's white. Well, that's the center light. That's where the light is directly hitting the surface. As the light begins to turn in a little bit away, or the surface is beginning to turn a little bit away from the light rays, it begins to go into halftones. And so that's what I'm averaging out right now. And I'm just going to do that by going into what I would call a halftone 3, which is that darkest light. And so we'll make all this area now, all of this area, I'm going to average this whole thing out right here into this halftone. This whole area, I'm going to just let that be flat and get it all diagrammed. That's all. Actually, glad I said that word, came to my mind. That's what compression is, or compressed values. That's what they are. They are a diagram of values, of the value structure, of any image. So, but the helpful part of doing this approach is that it trains you to look for values. Now, so many, especially what I call emerging artists, students of art in various levels, so many will just be focused on trying to make it look like the image, and they'll not be able to see their differences in values because they're trying to make it look like the image. That is a pitfall. You just struggle. As long as you keep that approach to painting, you just struggle. But we try to teach students to look for what the image is made of in terms of value, in terms of shape, and those things that we call visual elements that are what cause you to see what you see. So if you will switch your attention from trying to get it right into looking for the various values, you will become a better painter, you'll become a better painter quicker, and you'll enjoy the process. You won't have to struggle. Okay, so now that's what this method is a good way to do that. All right, so now we've got it divided into compressed values. That's what we have right here. From this point, and we don't have time in the quick tip, it would go way too long. But we would start in this point and we refine those values. Now I'm going to show you just a little bit, just a tiny bit about how we do that. First, what we would do here is I always like to start in the dark, and then now we can define these values we see in the dark area. Now we can reach for the values that we see and make that definition. And so, for example, now I can reach for this darkest dark down here, and I can begin to form the variations of those values that I see within the shadow area. So I'm now going to be looking for and defining these values. And I'll do that just a bit to show you what I'm talking about. And now we begin to gradate. We begin to find ways to gradate where we're actually mixing. You see what I'm doing on the palette here? We're mixing between. Now that's why I love my value line, because it enables us to work between value levels and saturation levels too, but that's not what this is about. So you see I can begin to just kind of reach with this mixture with the dark in my brush. I can begin now to sort of reach into that middle value and darken it, and now I can begin to get value gradations and build that painting of that pot in value gradations. This finger, get enough of that just to show you the potential here. Now you see, as I'm building those gradations, let's get this one a little bit smoother. As I build those gradations, now you can begin to see I build those gradations towards this value right here. That means I shouldn't get this any darker than this because I want that to gradate. I want this image to gradate into this image. And so now, there we go. There we go. Now, the next part, after I'd finished gradating the dark into that middle value, I would begin to sort of gradate the middle value into the light. I'll do just a hair of that, but I just want to show you just that much, because here is where, this is the transition right here, this little transition right here. And so I would begin to build that. I could just come backwards here now and create that blend. You can see already, you begin to see it, the roundness of it. Now, of course, that particular pot has those marks in it going in this way, at this direction, and I can begin to put those in. I can begin to show those differences in value that are creating those particular marks on the pot. So that's enough for me to show you. You take that process all the way through, working your degrees of values in the dark, in the shadow areas, then going into that transition, that middle value area, work those gradations of one end to the other. Then you go into the light area and do the same thing. Then work into it little textures that you see, that little value variations. That's what you call the refinement phase. And you will find if you use that little approach, you can use value compression to your advantage to create almost anything you see. Be sure and view all of our quick tips. And while you're doing so, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell so you'll always get a notice when we produce a new quick tip, which is every week. And if you have a question, leave it in the comments section and we'll make a quick tip for you. Also, take a trip over to DianneMize.com where I have full-length lessons, downloads, DVDs, lots of other stuff there, some free stuff for you. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the newsletter, and that way you'll always be informed every time we do something new.